Good afternoon. It's lovely to see you again. Thank you for coming. When I arrived at the White House with the Clintons in January of 1993, I knew nothing about the White House. Even though I am a Washington native, I had never really thought about the White House at all, didn't even know there was a visitor's office. And I got my job for two reasons. One is because of my years at the National Gallery of Art as an exhibition supervisor, which really qualified me very well for my job, and also my lifelong friendship with my good friend Bill Clinton. So that's how I got my job. So I arrived at the White House and again knew nothing about it. And like any executive of any office, I would always start the day with a plan for what my office should be accomplishing that day and going forward. But I very quickly learned that my day would almost invariably be interrupted with a call from the Oval Office. Melinda, the president just met with Tom Hanks. Please come walk him around the house. Or a call from Hillaryland. Melinda, Hillary just had tea with the Queen of Sweden. Please come walk her around the house. So I realized very quickly I was going to have to learn everything I could learn as fast as possible about the house itself. And what I wanted to learn was not the numbers, because I'm terrible with numbers, the number of bathrooms and all of that kind of thing. What I wanted to learn was the stories that, to me, bring the house alive. And in those dark days before Google and the interwebs and Amazon, where did we go for information? We went to libraries. I haunted libraries and used bookstores, bought and read everything I could get my hands on so that I could learn about America's house. This is a contemporaneous watercolor of the house during the John Adams administration. Tiber Creek no longer exists. It's been long since covered over, but when Adams was in the house, it was there, and it was his bathing pool. So he used to walk down from the house, take off his clothes, fold them neatly, and go for a swim to clean off and cool off. But that is no longer there. Now, if you arrive to the White House, you will see that by American standards, it is a very large house indeed. 55,000 square feet. That's a very large house. It was the largest house in America until well after the Civil War. It is set into an 18-acre park, and it is actually park number 1 in the National Park Service system. Most people are not aware of that. Beautiful lawns, trees, flowering shrubs. The gardening division takes fantastic care of the White House. It's always beautiful. Perhaps you would arrive this morning for an arrival ceremony. A visiting head of state has come. We've welcomed that person, and you're standing behind the troops here looking at the White House gleaming in the sunshine. And it's a very exciting moment. If we've lucked out, the weather is good, and it's just a very thrilling experience to be there. But perhaps what you'd really like is to go inside the house itself. And here's a diagram that shows you the east wing. Now, my office was here, so I had windows overlooking the north driveway and the north lawn up here. Had a staff of 7, and we occupied all of this space. But visitors come in through this lobby here, and then go down the colonnade and into the house itself. You may wonder why I would include a photo of a ramp. How interesting could a ramp be? But this ramp is very close to my heart. We used to have a special tour every December for very sick children. And I mean children literally brought in, not just in wheelchairs, but on gurneys, held in their parents' arms, frail, very, very sick children. And while there is a way to circumvent those stairs, it involves going around a corner, getting help from a Secret Service, going up in a lift. It was awkward. So I asked the Park Service carpenters to create for me a ramp, and they built me a ramp. And then we took pictures of the aides wheeling wheelchairs with sick children up the ramp. I was so happy with that ramp. I just loved it. Well, for reasons that I could never figure out, the chief usher, a very, very difficult man to work with, hated the ramp. I don't know why. He was one of those people who I hope you have never had to work with, just wanted to make everything as difficult as possible for everyone around him for no reason that you could ever figure out. And he complained about the ramp. And back and forth we went until finally Hillary's aide said, we have to resolve this. So the three of us sat down. He made his arguments, which were ridiculous. He said that if the ramp stayed in place, Hillary could be accused of altering the house without permission. Well, get a grip, buddy. It's number one, it's her house. She can do whatever she wants with it. And number two, it wasn't altering anything. It wasn't installed. It was simply resting on the floor. So then Hillary's aide turned to me and said, well, Melinda, what's your take on this? And I opened my folder. I took out the memo I had sent to Hillary. We had had photos taken of these sick children, the gurneys going up that ramp, and I had sent those photos to Hillary with a memo explaining that I'd had it built and what it was for. She had read the memo, looked at the photos, and then wrote her own notes on my memo, sent it back to me. And her note said, "This is absolutely fabulous. I hope we can be an example for other historic houses." So I presented that to her aide. I said, "Hillary thinks it's pretty great," and the ramp stayed. And when I left, I thought, oh, for sure, he's going to get rid of it because he's just such an unpleasant person. But no, they've kept the ramp ever since, so I'm really proud of my contribution to disability access at the White House. On the right side is a reception room. We always had a tea table with a guest book on it for special guests to sign. This is not where tourists go. You are not tourists today. Today, I have gotten each one of you a special access pass, and we're going places no tourist ever goes. But my favorite day, and I can't believe I don't have a photo of this page, but in the morning, the beautiful and elegant former Queen of Greece and her very well-behaved and pretty children, and in the afternoon, the Grateful Dead, which was pretty much a normal day, at least in the Clinton White House. I have sat on that sofa with Mikhail Baryshnikov waiting for other guests to arrive. He was going to dance that night, all kinds of people. But one that sticks in my mind is the Crown Prince of Nepal, who had just graduated from one of our fine Ivy League institutions. I couldn't figure out how. He appeared to me to be as dumb as a rock. He just sat there. I don't know if he was just stupid or he was stoned. I don't know what. But anyway, he was there, and we were going to take good care of him. Well, about a month or so later, the news came from Nepal that he was infatuated with a woman that he wanted to marry. His family did not approve, was not going to let him marry the woman that he loved. So he took an automatic weapon and slaughtered them all in the throne room of the palace. How creepy is that? But anyway, the Grateful Dead. So we go along the hallway here, and on the left is a garden. It is the Jacqueline Kennedy Garden, a mirror image of the Rose Garden, which is over by the West Wing. And on the right side of that, you'll see what just looks like a wall, but behind it is actually the White House Theater. And it is a theater in which you can see movies. Bill Clinton used to like to watch Razorbacks football and basketball games on the big screen there. It's a real thrill for a Hollywood producer or director or star to have his or her movie shown in the president's own theater. But as you can see here, it's also used for very serious events. So here is George W. Bush with his aides practicing perhaps for a press conference or his State of the Union address. They would be shooting questions at him. We think they will ask this, we think they'll ask that, and figuring out what are the president's answers going to be. During the Obama years, it was renovated, and now it really looks like a theater in red velvet with the gold accents, and as you can see, the technology for showing 3D movies as well. That must be fun. We would go along the ground floor, and we have just been here, and now we are stepping, this is the White House itself, and then the West Wing over here. And the White House is very easy to get oriented because it's all by compass points, north, south, east, and west. And the White House does not have a back door. How could you invite someone to come to the back door of the White House? It has a south door and a north door. Here's what the hallway looks like that connects east and west wings, north on the right side, south on the left side there. And on the left side, the vermeil room. Vermeil is a French word that means a gold overlay over sterling silver. And the White House has a very nice collection of vermeil pieces. And these rooms are redecorated on a regular basis, not on a whim, because it's very expensive, but because things get shabby and worn out. Tens of thousands of people walk through these rooms all the time, although tourists don't get to go in these rooms, but guests at events do. Things get shabby. You hope people won't touch stuff, but they do. The paint gets grimy. The textiles wear out. So things have to be renovated on a regular basis. And it is not paid for with taxpayer money, you will be happy to hear. All of these renovations are paid for by a grant from the White House Historical Association, which was founded by Jacqueline Kennedy, and they have more money than God. So don't worry about who funds all this. Here's a photo of some of those Vermeer pieces. They were donated to the White House during the Eisenhower administration. They sit in a glass case on display, but the floral designers may come anytime they want. Someone unlocks the case. With gloved hands, they take out a pitcher or a bowl or some other thing and take it back to the flower shop, fill with flowers, and then put those on display in either the public rooms or up in the private residence. But the most significant thing in this room clearly is the First Lady's portraits that hang there. And I think the most famous of those is Jacqueline Kennedy. It is such an unusual portrait. This woman barely appears in her own portrait. She is ghost-like. Her face is soft and out of focus. Her dress is gauzy and cloud-like. It just sort of floats around her. Even the hydrangeas are soft and out of focus. It's a very unusual portrait. You'd think that normally someone would want to be very clearly represented, but this is what she wanted. Mrs. Kennedy was a tall and imposing woman, but she had, you're all too young to remember this, but she had an odd, soft, breathy kind of voice. So strange coming out of such a tall and imposing woman. But anyway, she was invited to come to the White House to view this painting when it was finally ready to be hung. The first and only time she ever returned to the White House. She saw it and she liked the painting, but at the bottom of the frame was one of those little brass plaques that you see on paintings that says, what's the subject of the painting and who's the artist? And the brass plaque said, Jacqueline Onassis. And she said, no, can't hang it like that. It should read Jacqueline Kennedy. But madam, you are Jacqueline Onassis now. Yes, but I was Jacqueline Kennedy when I lived in this house. And if you do not change the label, I will not permit you to hang this painting. So they came up with a very Jesuitical solution, which is that there's always a tea table right below this painting, and there's always a plant on the tea table that's just tall enough to cover the very bottom edge of the painting. So, and no one needs a label to know who this lady is. But again, such an amazing work of art, so much so that Mrs. Reagan chose the same artist, Aaron Schickler, to paint her portrait, and look how different this is. Where Mrs. Kennedy is gauzy and ghost-like, Mrs. Reagan is in sharp focus, her face and all of it. She's wearing a dress in a color that she wore so often, it was called Nancy Red. She is in front of the beautiful rosewood doors to the blue room, sharply, sharply in focus. I think it's amazing that an artist could capture two such different women in such distinctly different ways. Also on the left side is the china room, and in this room are different bits of china on display from the very beginning, a few pieces of the Washington china, all the way up to the present era. And they are displayed like this. So here at the top is Mrs. Reagan's china, Hillary's china, and at the bottom, Mrs. Johnson's china, which isn't used much because it's too delicate. It doesn't show up well under candlelight. Across the hallway is Mrs. Bush's version of the library. It was renovated during the Bush years. And the other day I mentioned that Mrs. Adams came and had this room used as her laundry room. It was not a fancy reception room in 1800 when the Adams were there. But it's a beautiful library with books by American authors on geography, politics, law, economics. I certainly never saw anyone borrow a book from this library other than occasionally Chelsea would come down and look for a book to help with her homework. But it is a beautiful reception space. And so here is a diagram showing the most significant architectural feature, I think, of the house, which is oval rooms. George Washington loved oval rooms because he believed that without corners, people couldn't hang back and be shy. Everyone would have to step out and be part of whatever was going on. And there are 3 oval rooms in the house itself, and I'm not talking about the Oval Office over in the West Wing. So the first oval room we will look at is the diplomatic reception room. We're still on the ground floor. And the most striking feature of this beautiful room is the amazing scenic wallpaper. This paper was created by a French firm, Zuber. They're located in Paris. And they are still today making this hand-blocked, hand-colored scenic wallpaper of different kinds for different places. I've been in the Embassy of Brazil, for example, where they have Zuber paper, but it represents the flora and fauna of exotic Brazil. But here is this paper representing early American scenes and life. And it's an astonishing story of how it came to the White House. When Mrs. Kennedy came to the White House, she found that it had last been decorated by Bonwit Teller, a New York department store, not known for historic renovations. There was almost nothing still in the house from its past. No objects, no art, no furnishings. She was heartbroken. And she is the one who began the effort to restore the house to its 19th century splendor. And everybody knew about this historic effort. It was widely publicized. There was a designer out in Maryland, Thurmont, Maryland, a far out suburb of D.C., who happened to be driving past a very old house in the country that was undergoing demolition. He thought, oh, I should go and look at that. Maybe there's something I can salvage for a client, some pilasters or columns or some pediment or something. He went in and looked, and he saw this paper on the walls, realized that it was fabulous, was able to get a scrap of it, and was able to get it into the hands of the First Lady. Mrs. Kennedy looked at it and said, oh, we must have this for the White House. So he went back and told the demolition crew, the White House wants this wallpaper. Okay, they said, but we're only giving you 3 days. You can scrape it off or steam it off, whatever you need to do, but in 3 days, this house is coming down. So that's what they did. They scraped and steamed it off. I'm sure in some places it came off in sheets like regular wallpaper, but in some places I am sure it came off in little bits of paper. And they brought it all to the White House and installed it the way you would install wallpaper. And it fit so perfectly on the gentle curves of this elliptical saloon, as Washington would have called it. And today it has been very carefully digitally mapped, every bit of it, so that if a piece of paint flecks off over here or over there, conservators know that they need to come with a tiny brush, and this tree is green number 7, and this blue over here in the sky is blue number 11, and they can touch it all up. But it is absolutely gorgeous paper. And it reflects scenes of early American life. This is Boston Harbor. How many of you have been in Boston? You may recognize City Hall there from the very earliest days. And here are sailors with their cargo, their bales of cargo, and one of them wearing a French freedom cap on his head from the French Revolution. There were scenes of American tourist sites. Niagara Falls was already a tourist site. Here's the Maid of the Mist chugging along down here underneath the falls. There's more of this paper besides what is on the walls in the diplomatic reception room. It was installed on the walls of the private family dining room up in the private residence, but it reflected battle scenes and the surrender at Yorktown. And Mrs. Ford decided she did not want to have her breakfast, eat her Wheaties, looking at soldiers with bayonets and blood dripping. So that paper has been very carefully conserved and covered over and is not really available to be seen. Next door to the diplomatic reception room is the map room. Tourists don't usually get to see the map room. There are maps in there. They are rolled up behind a painting. The painting is a big painting, and it's hung on a piano hinge. So you can open it like this, and here are these rolled up maps that you can pull down and look at. And my favorite map is signed Pierre Jefferson, because Thomas Jefferson's father, like most of the educated men of his era, was a cartographer. But the most fascinating use of this room is in modern history, because during World War II, this was the war room for President Roosevelt and for Prime Minister Churchill, who came and spent weeks, sometimes months at a time, living in the White House, working with President Roosevelt on the conduct of the war. So they had tables set out to represent every different theater of war. Here's North Africa, here's Italy, here's Greece, here's what's happening in the Baltics, here's what's happening in the Pacific. And all the intel from all these places during the war would come pouring into this specific place, so that the president or the prime minister could come down at any hour of the day and night and be briefed on what was happening during the war anywhere around the world. And this was such a secure site that it took me 5 years to come up with these 2 photographs of this room being used, because there were no photographs. It was the most secure spot in the entire country. We would come out of this room and go up the stairs. We will turn to our right and enter the East Room, which is the largest and most elaborate of the reception rooms in the White House. And you can see here a diagram. We'd come in the East Room here and then go through the color parlors and the dining room. And normally you would be leaving out that way, but I have a surprise for you. So here is the East Room, and that is Harry Truman's piano. Steinway made this for him with the gold eagle legs as a special gift to the White House. As you may know, President Truman enjoyed playing the piano. If we were in the White House today and you were regular guests, I would be telling you now, this is a house full of history and a living house. So where we are standing under this central chandelier is also a site of very sad happenings. Abraham Lincoln dreamed about his death, and he told people about his dream the night before he was assassinated. He told people that he was awakened by the sound of weeping, got up from his bed, put on his dressing gown, went down to the East Room and saw a scene that he described looking like this. He said to one of the soldiers, "Son, who has died?" And the soldier said, "Oh, sir, the president has died." And he woke up. And so where we are standing is a site where very sad history has happened, including in my lifetime as a young person, another slain president lying in rest under this central chandelier. When Mrs. Kennedy returned from the tragic day in Texas on Air Force One with the Johnsons, she was in touch with the curators and the ushers, and she told them that she wanted her husband's funeral rites to mimic as closely as possible President Lincoln's funeral rites. And so that is what they did. And some of you may be old enough to remember, for example, the sight of President Kennedy's horse saddled but with the boots turned backwards. That was the image also from the Lincoln assassination. So it's a site of great history, some of it very sad. But again, it's a living house. So I would say to you, when you return to your hotel rooms this afternoon, be sure to turn on the television, because the president will be having a press conference here with his visiting head of state. And the press will be where we are standing. The press will be asking questions. It's a house in which history is made every day. Next door is the green room. It's a very pretty parlor, and I think the most striking feature in it is this portrait of Ben Franklin. Franklin was already a generation older than the other founding fathers, and he was an inspired and effective diplomat. They sent him off to Paris, where he lobbied heavily with the French court to get French support for the revolution. We needed their money. We needed their navy. Now, he was a great diplomat. I will say he was a terrible husband, just the worst husband. He left his wife. He didn't see her for 10 years. She was in charge of the printing presses and all their other little businesses, and all of that money that she was able to scrape together was sent to him so he could live a very grand lifestyle in Paris. He didn't even come home for her funeral, so not a great husband. This portrait belonged to Mr. and Mrs. Walter Annenberg of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. They were very wealthy people. They were publishers, I think, of Reader's Digest or that television magazine. TV Guide, thank you. There's always someone smarter than I am in the audience. They owned this painting, and I cannot tell you for sure this is what happened, but I do like to imagine Mrs. Kennedy calling Mr. Annenberg, and in that soft, breathy little voice saying, "Didn't he think it would be just so wonderful if the modern era first citizen of Philadelphia would send to the White House a portrait of the Revolutionary era first citizen of Philadelphia?" But whatever she said, it was effective. The Annenbergs lent the painting, and now it, in fact, belongs to the White House. So thank you for their generosity. Rooms get redecorated based on the style and taste of the day. So this is this is a very early 20th century version of the Blue Room. Now, I will tell you that the Gasolier, that picture, is long gone, as is the tuffet. But although this painting does not make it look very pretty, it must in fact have been a really beautiful room because it was decorated by Louis Comfort Tiffany in this Tiffany blue and silver. Those are silver stars on the ceiling, silver stars descending from the cornice at the top of the room, silver behind the gas lights. It must have been a very beautiful room. And that is Mrs. Grover Cleveland, the youngest lady ever to be First Lady in the White House, and how she came to be First Lady was really kind of scandalous. As a young girl, Mrs. Cleveland's parents had been very good friends with Grover Cleveland. And then tragically, both of this young woman's parents were killed in an accident. She was then the ward of Mr. Cleveland. He was in charge of this young woman's upbringing. And they must have become very close during his wardship because as soon as she became of age, they got married. First wedding in the White House. So it was a little bit of a scandal. This is the Kennedy Blue Room, and my designer friends who are experts on the White House insist that this is the most beautiful version of the Blue Room they've ever seen, although I have heard them refer to this table as the fat Spanish dancer, which I think is just cruel. Maybe it's the fringe, but yes, it's a beautiful room. Now, the most interesting thing in this room is the suite of furniture that was designed for President and Mrs. Monroe. Mrs. Monroe created an order for a large set of furnishings to go specifically in this elliptical saloon, and she ordered rosewood furniture. Now, some of you may have at some point had a piece of furniture custom upholstered or custom built for you, and it took weeks or maybe even a couple of months for you to get it. Think about this process for Mrs. Monroe. She had to compose her order. It got put on a ship in Georgetown. Then it spent weeks, maybe 2 months, going across the Atlantic. It arrived at the north of France. It's put on a carriage. The carriage takes it to Paris. The cabinet makers unrolled Mrs. Monroe's order, reviewed it, and decided on their own that rosewood furniture was not sufficiently grand for the home of a head of state, and so instead they created this gilt furniture. Now, again, I cannot tell you this is exactly what happened, but imagine this. It takes months and months for this suite of furniture to be built. All of the pieces are put on a cart and trekked back to the north of France, put on a ship. It takes more months for the ship to come to Georgetown. The crates are unloaded, and they're brought to the White House. They're set up on the floorboards of the north entrance, and a servant comes and pries open a crate. The sawdust spills out, and there, instead of her rosewood furniture, is this beautiful gilt furniture. I hope she liked it very much. Now, over time, as I said, when Mrs. Kennedy came, nothing was there that was originally there, and here is why. Over the years, there was never any effort to protect White House things. So let's say you are an incoming presidential family, and you're walking through your new home, and you look around, and you say to him, honey, I don't like all these old-fashioned things. And he says to you, that's all right, my darling. I'll tell you what we'll do. Congress will give us an appropriation, $20,000, but it won't be enough, really. So here's what we'll do. We'll take all these old-fashioned things. We'll put them out on the north lawn and have us a yard sale. And that is what had happened over the years. Things had been sold off, things had been lifted and taken away. So nothing that was originally there, and so Mrs. Kennedy began the effort to restore things. And the final piece of this beautiful suite of furniture that returned to this room was this beautiful settee, custom made for the gentle curve of this elliptical saloon. And it was found in a garage in Georgetown. Just amazing. Hillary had the opportunity to redecorate this room, and she selected the brilliant sapphire blue and all the gilt edges and touches in the room. And it has been refurbished since then, but they have kept the same decor, the same vivid blue and the gold. This is what the process of redecorating looks like. So that's Hillary in the red suit. That's the villain of my story over here holding up. I have written a memoir White House story, and it's a largely positive, I hope, version of my own times there, and there's only one person I have anything bad to say about, and it is this guy here, the chief usher, who was so difficult. But anyway, this is what the process of redecoration looks like. And here is the blue room, very beautiful oval room. It is it's a room that tourists walk through, but as you can see here, it is also a room that is used all the time, because the minute the last tourist is out the door in the middle of the day, a whole team of people sweep in to clean and freshen and plump pillows and whatever, because later that day the president's going to be sitting in this room to review his notes before a press conference or before he makes an address to a crowd in a room or whatever. These rooms are used all the time because it is a living site as well as an historic one. I'm very fond of the red room because I think ladies look pretty in the pink glow from these silk upholstered walls. It's very pretty in here. And the most striking thing is clearly this portrait of Angelica Van Buren, not the wife of the president. President Van Buren is here in the portrait bust. He was a widower. This young woman had just married his son. And they went off to Europe on their honeymoon, where they were very grandly entertained in royal houses. Here you can see she's dressed to be presented to the Prince of Wales in her white gown and her white feathers, as was traditional. They returned from their honeymoon, and she had some very grand ideas about how entertaining should happen at the president's house. So she instructed that the carpenters build a raised platform, maybe something as high as this small stage, for the president to stand on during receptions so he could be above everyone. If you are a king or an emperor, I suppose it's entirely appropriate to elevate yourself above everyone else. But if you are the President of the United States and the guests at your events are members of Congress, representatives, senators from the Carolinas, Florida, Massachusetts, New Jersey, wherever, I assure you the last thing you want to do is elevate yourself above them. So the president had to disabuse her of this idea pretty promptly. Again, these rooms are decorated based on the time and the taste of the occupant. As you may know, Teddy Roosevelt was our first great conservationist, but he was also a big game hunter. So here are some of his big game trophies hanging on the walls. I'm not sure I would have wanted to have dinner surrounded by all of that, but again, it reflects the time and it reflects the taste. And here is Hillary's dining room, and I will say that for the 1990s, this was a very attractive room. The flowers on the carpet, the flowers on the curtains, and so forth. But it really became dated, and it was redecorated by Mrs. Obama. I'll confess that when I saw photos of this, when it was first opened, I thought, oh, I don't care for that at all. But then I saw it in person, and it is really a very elegant room. Just the simplicity of the brown and the blue stripes in the curtains, the same brown and blue in the carpet, horsehair upholstery on the, it is really a beautiful and elegant and modern and fresh looking room because new generations take over in the White House, and that is entirely appropriate. This striking thing in the center here is the Monroe Plateau, and it is made in sections that can be put together to stretch out the entire length of a large dining table, or if you're using the table shorter with fewer sections, the plateau can be in fewer sections. And about once a year, the floral designers stretch it all the way out on the table and fill every bowl and pitcher and cup with flowers and fruits and candles so that people can see what it would have looked like during the Monroe years. These rooms have been used for different purposes ever since the White House was first occupied. So yes, this is the state dining room, but in Jefferson's era, this part of it was his study. And you can see here his library of books. When Jefferson died, his estate was bankrupt. He had entertained so much, he had bought so much stuff, he was endlessly curious. So his estate sold his books to the U.S. government, where it became the very beginning of the Library of Congress. And you can see here maps and a globe, and that is because this is where he was working with Colonel Meriwether Lewis. Colonel Lewis had a section of the East Room set apart for him with screens, where he lived and worked, because together they were planning the Lewis and Clark expedition, in which Lewis and Clark walked across the continental United States. So again, these rooms have been used throughout history for many different purposes. A small room adjacent is this old family dining room, and this used to not be open to the public, but Mrs. Trump is the first lady who said, let these doors be open, let people see. And here you can see Mrs. Laura Bush. She's showing off her brand new china to the press. It was a very gracious room. I will say it was redecorated by Mrs. Obama. Now, the Obamas were and are a generation younger than the first families that preceded them, and they're from the Midwest, and they had very different tastes from the people that preceded them. And it is entirely appropriate for them to redecorate according to their preferences. But I'm a more traditional East Coast kind of person, and I like some modern art, not this modern art, and I am not a big fan of brown, so I'm not really fond of this room. And I am really looking forward to seeing, I'm confident that Mrs. Trump will be redecorating this room. I look forward to seeing it. We would now be walking down the cross hall. We're still on the state floor, and come to the North Foyer. On a Saturday morning, I had come in to give a private tour to Graham Nash and David Crosby of Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. this was quite an experience. And as we came to the end of our time together, we walked past the state piano. Graham Nash sat down and began to play and sing. For me, our house is a very, very fine house. Yeah, I mean, that was very special, very special. Normally, I would be collecting your passes at this point and telling you as you go out the north door, thank you for coming, have a brilliant day. But you are not normal guests today. I have gotten special permission from the First Lady to take you up to the private residence where no tourists ever go. It's their living space. But you are special, so come with me today. If you look from the outside, you would think that the residence has only one floor. But that's because this balustrade is hiding that there is a top floor in the residence as well. So here's a diagram of what it looks like, and you can see, oh, another oval room. Whoops, let's go back. Another oval room, and some of the rooms we're going to be taking a look at here. So there are the sitting halls, east and west, with these beautiful Palladian windows. The First Lady might sit here and have a meeting with the executive chef, go over menus. She might be meeting with her chief of staff, go over some issues of whatever kind. But the center hall is essentially the living room for the first family, and so of course it is decorated to their preferences. The Obamas, as I said, love modern art, they love music, and so this must have been a very welcoming space for them. This is the space during the first Trump administration, and we'll have to see if Mrs. Trump replicates this or if she does something completely different. There has been word for a long time that she was working on a book about the redecoration of the spaces in the White House because she did quite a lot, but I have not seen any word that that book is ready to be published. I'm really looking forward to it. This is the Kennedy Yellow Oval Room, and it is in these pastel colors. This is a sort of a, not quite yellow, almost a celadon with the coral upholstery. It's a beautiful, beautiful room, and again, redecorated all the time. This pale sort of butter yellow, and Hillary adores yellow. It's her favorite color, but the Clintons like really vivid colors, so for her, and pattern. So for her, this is a very different look. And then Mrs. Obama takes it back to the softer, more subtle shades with the chestnut upholstery and the softer color on the walls and the window coverings. And Mrs. Trump redecorated, you see, it's just a cycle. She redecorated also with very different art. They don't like modern art, that's for sure. And the sofas instead of so many chairs. These rooms are used all the time. So here is Mrs. Obama entertaining the Queen of Belgium, I think this is. I always forget who that is. Pretty sure that's Belgium. At tea, perhaps, with her husband there. So they're used all the time. And right outside this yellow oval room is the Truman balcony, built by President Truman during the reconstruction of the White House during his term. And it is a fabulous space. How many of you have been to Washington during our annual humidity festival? Anybody? No? It's frightful, right? As hot and humid as any place we have been on this cruise. So the summers are hot and humid and sticky and unpleasant. And our winters are cold and damp, ice, sleet, snow. But autumn and spring in Washington are fantastic. And so for the First Lady to get to sit outside on this balcony, read something, review pages, meet with her chief of staff, whatever, this balcony is really beloved by first families. Next door is the version of the Kennedy study or treaty room. This was very important to Mrs. Kennedy to redo this room for her husband. And here is what it looked like in the Clinton years. I myself, back in the 90s, I had oxblood red walls in my house for about 9 years. So they love these colors and all of the pattern. Now, it is called the treaty room because, see the painting there on the wall. In that painting is the desk, and that's the desk right there, and it is the desk on which the treaty was signed, ending the Spanish-American War. And that is why the room is called the treaty room. Now, it is clear that it is barely a 5-minute walk for the president from the residence down to the Oval Office in the West Wing. But nevertheless, he has an office right there, just 2 steps from bedrooms, and they use it. So here is President Bush, and this was probably on a weekend when many staff would not be present, but was President Bush's very senior staff. And so they're more casually dressed, and they're meeting with the president in his office, the treaty room. President Obama redecorated it, and they used this room less as a president's office, and I think more as a space for their girls to use. And such a beautiful room with this grass cloth wall covering, the stenciling at the top of the wall, and these wonderful paintings of early American life and Native American life on the walls. I think this is a gorgeous room. Next door is the Lincoln bedroom. This room was redecorated by Mrs. Laura Bush in high Victorian style. President Lincoln hated all this stuff. He referred to it as flubdubs. He was furious with his wife for spending money on flubdubs when the soldiers cannot have blankets, and he never slept in that bed because he was so angry about it. But look at all that's going on here in this high Victorian style. This is a heavily carved rosewood bed, a heavy lace curtain. This is a purple velvet curtain with swags, gold and purple swags, and gold and purple tassels, and a gold cornice. There's a lot going on here. And look at, there's pattern on the walls, there's pattern on the upholstery pieces, there's pattern on the floor, because that was the Victorian style. And in the corner is this small, unassuming desk. It is the desk on which Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Now imagine you're an overnight guest of the president in the Lincoln bedroom, and you get to sit at the desk at which Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Next door is the family dining room, and you can see here some of that scenic paper I was talking about, but again, it was really redecorated. So, and here is Hillary's version. Hillary loves yellow, and they love art, especially Georgia O'Keeffe, so that is an O'Keeffe hanging between the windows there. Here is the Queen's bedroom, and it's not really named after Queen Elizabeth because there have been other queens and princesses who stayed there. Now, you are all very sophisticated travelers, and I am sure many of you have stayed in hotel rooms that are just as fancy, just as nice as this. But for the White House, this is a really lovely room. Redecorated by Mrs. Trump during the first administration, a brighter, lighter-looking kind of room, but still with a portrait of, that's Dolly Madison on the wall there. Adjacent to it is this small dressing room, and it was decorated in this beautiful blue and white French toile fabric for Mrs. Kennedy. And out of respect for Mrs. Kennedy, when the fabric has become old or needs refurbishing, they have used the exact same fabric so that it will always look the way it was when Mrs. Kennedy lived in the house. So there's a top floor to the residence. You can't see it from below, but there's a top floor. Now, let's say you've been at an event at the White House this evening, and it has been it'll be memories for a lifetime. You'll never forget how fabulous every minute of it was, but you look at your watch and you realize, oh dear, it's time to go. You reach for your bag, a military aide comes and whispers in your ear, you have been invited, the president would like you to join them up in the residence in the solarium. You've just been invited to the world's most exclusive after party. You come into the house. The elevator is staffed by a butler in white tie and tails. You go up to the top floor, come down the hallway, and go into the solarium. Again, another space redecorated. I'm going to run out of time here, so I'll go quickly, but redecorated for whoever's living in the house. Hillary always has to have comfortable chairs and good lighting for reading. This is the executive pastry chef who taught Chelsea how to make sugar flowers and how to bake. And this is the Obama solarium where the girls used to invite their friends to do homework, to do sleepovers. But perhaps you've been at this event and you've been in that room where the president and the first lady are talking with the most important people in the world who have also been guests at this event. I myself, when I was invited, was too overwhelmed to ever participate in the conversation, but I certainly listened. And then if you're overwhelmed by all of this, you step out here and you look out at the lawn, which is dark, but there are uplights under the trees and the shrubs, and you can see Mr. Jefferson and his memorial and the Washington Monument also lit up. And if you are anything like me, you say to yourself, how did I, an ordinary person, get to come here to the adventure of a lifetime? And it really was the thrill and adventure of a lifetime. So now I will have to collect your special access passes and bid you a fond farewell and say I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you so much for coming to spend time with me. I really appreciate it. Thank you.